Well, last week, I let everybody know that my wife abandoned me. My wife left me she just got back yesterday, and so I was without a wife this entire week, but then I thought, that's going to be okay, because, my firstborn, she just graduated college, she'll spend time with me, right? But no, Hannah graduated and said, I'm taking off to California. So she and some girlfriends just drove to California for the week. She just got back yesterday. And Caleb is at PLU, and Megan's up at Bellingham. And so for this entire week, I was all by my lonesome in the house. It was just me and the cats. And I'll tell you what, it was awesome. Oh my goodness. I had the best week. I played my music so loud, nobody could tell me to turn it down. I left the toilet seats up at all the bathrooms in the house all week long. I threw bottles in the trash can because the recycling Nazi was not there to stop me. So I just had a fantastic week. I'm kidding. Actually, it was a tough week, honey. It was so difficult. And, I did miss you. Yeah. And the cats are still alive. Yes. What's that? She missed me a little bit. Yeah. So it was a hard week, honey. So, well, our text today in the book of Hebrews is all about what to do when life is hard. We've been talking about those who are receiving this letter of Hebrews, really a sermon. It's written to a group of people, Christians, who are going through a hard time, a difficult time. They're facing persecution. Living the Christian life is getting hard, difficult, and so the writer of Hebrews is saying, hang in there, persevere, endure, and so there's that encouragement, this letter, and our text is really zeroes in on this, and it's really about how to become men and women who know what to do when things get tough, when things are really hard and difficult. And I would say that they needed this message because they were going through some hard times, but I think we need this even more. Because I don't think there's ever been a culture in history that has more of a low pain tolerance than our culture. I mean, we're doing whatever we can to avoid any kind of pain, any kind of suffering. I think just as a culture, we have this even sense of entitlement that we should not experience any hardship, any struggles. We try to avoid it at all costs. We get mad if we don't get what we want. And so we need this word about how to persevere in the faith, how to live the life of faith, or just how to live life in general when things don't go as we would like them to go, or as we've planned, or God calls an audible on our plans and things come up that suddenly kind of throws us off course, kind of diverts us from our plans. And so as we look at this text this morning, I just kind of see three lessons in these verses 1 to 11. Number one, expect life to be hard. Number two, see the hard things in life as discipline. And then number three, view the discipline in two ways, as discipline by a coach on a winning team, and also as discipline by a father in a loving family. So let's take a look at each of those. First, expect life to be hard. One of the last things that Jesus said to his disciples on the night before he went to the cross, so the night before he dies, and he basically told the disciples, I'm just letting you know, it's not going to be easy. This Christianity thing that I'm launching, it's going to be tough. It is not going to be easy. And then he actually gave a promise in John 16, verse 33, says this, in this world, you will have trouble. Talk about claiming the promises of God. Here's one of the promises of God to name and claim this. In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. And that's really essentially what our Hebrews passage is talking about too. Chapter 12, verse 1 that John read has this phrase, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. And there's really two words in that verse that signifies that this life is going to be tough, that there's going to be hardships in this Christian life thing and just in life in general. And one is the word perseverance. Why would you say persevere if there was not actually if there was not struggles such that you needed to persevere? If life was going easy, if life was carefree, then you don't need to persevere, do you? But the perseverance word signifies that obviously we're going through some hard times, that we would need to persevere. Didn't quite say that how I wanted to say it, but you get the point. The other word that is really kind of shows that that life is going to be tough is that word race. And that word race, really talking about how Christian life is like a race. But the Greek word for race is this word agona. Now, what does that sound like in the English? What do you, agony. We get the word agony for it. So it's really saying that the Christian life, at times, it's going to be like an agonizing struggle. And then there's another word also that kind of signifies that another word that would, or that an image that would kind of be kind of jarred into the memory of those recipients of this letter 2,000 years ago is there's a form of the word agona, which is agon, which is their word for the stadium that they would have these athletic competitions. 2,000 years ago in ancient Greek world, they would have these competitions, and they would actually do these pentathlons in these stadiums, these agons, which was, I think, running and jumping and javelin throwing and discus, and this thing called, it was kind of boxing, kind of wrestling. It was kind of a mix of boxing and wrestling. And so they would wrap your hands in these cloths so that you would protect your hands, and then basically they would just pummel each other, and the idea was to try to draw blood. And that might be the image that possibly is kind of being kind of brought up in this verse 4, where it says, in your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. In this race that we're in this pentathlon, you haven't drawn blood yet in this struggle. Now, if you read commentaries, most commentaries will tell you that probably the meaning of that verse is that the recipients of this letter, this sermon, are facing persecution, but they have not yet died. No one's died yet in their church they've not been martyred yet. And that's probably the meaning of that verse. But I think there might be a double meaning there, just because it's in the context of this race pentathlon thing and this boxing image too, that in that race that we're in, this Christian life race, you've yet to draw blood. You've yet to kind of continue on there. So the writer of Hebrews is really calling us to see the struggle of life as being in a race in which we need discipline. He's saying that life is a form of athletic training in which you need conditioning, you need discipline. And so that kind of leads us to number 2, that we're to see the hard things of life as discipline, as a process of being conditioned, being trained by those difficulties and disappointments in our life. And that's, I think, the meaning of this verse 11. Verse 11 says this, all discipline, for the moment, seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. And that phrase, have been trained by it, that word for train actually is, it's the Greek word for gymnasium, actually. It's the word gymnasio. Now, who here goes to a gym with the idea, I'm going to go to this gym and I'm going to rest. I'm going to kind of relax. I'm going to take it easy. No, isn't it crazy? You actually go to this building called a gym to experience pain and suffering. In fact, if you do not experience pain and suffering at the gym, then there's no point in going to the gym, because if it's just there will be no growth for you. If you go to the gym and don't. You need the pain and suffering to grow. To exercise itself is like it's putting stress on your body. And there's kind of a paradox here. I mean, take weightlifting, for example. Now, just looking at this specimen of a body that's before you right now, you can obviously tell that I lift weights. And so obviously you can see that I lift weights. But I don't want to make this all about me, so I'm going to use the example of Christian. So, Christian, obviously I lift weights, but you probably lift weights too, don't you? Yeah, so let me just ask you, Christian, when you're lifting weights, so when you do a bunch of sets, as you're doing it, and again, of course, I know this experience, but the more you do it, good job, Christian, just show off, go ahead, I'm going to do one modified push-up. So the more you do it, do you feel weaker or stronger the more you do it?
Both. Weaker.
Thank you. Yeah, don't mess up my analogy. Don't mess up my analogy. Yep, thank you. That was the right answer. You feel weaker. Because, like, for example, for myself, when I'm benching 300 pounds, I mean, I can do it for about 20 times. But about the 20th time, it's like I can't quite do it. It's like I feel weaker. But there's the paradox. It's actually that process of getting weaker is actually making you stronger. And that's really, that's what the writer of Hebrews is saying, that he's by using this metaphor of life as a race and being disciplined and conditioned for the race, being trained by it, means that at some level, suffering and pain is necessary for our growth. We have to experience suffering and pain at some level for there to really be growth in this life. And so we should, at some level, welcome the sufferings and difficulties of life. And that's what James says. James 1, 2-4 says this: "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." But how can you really do that? How can you really consider it all joy when you experience suffering? And particularly when you experience serious suffering. I mean, real trauma. And here's where the writer of Hebrews, I think, knows he needs to change metaphors. Because when you really experience deep suffering, I mean, and even traumatic things in your life and life-changing things, at that point, it's maybe not enough to just view God as your coach on a winning team, say, "Come, you can do it. Hang in there. Be tough. Win this race. You're in it to win." No, for those where there's a real traumatic, hard things in our life, we need to see God not as a coach, but as a father, as a loving father. And that's really kind of the next, this last point, that we're to view discipline two ways. Yes, as a coach on a winning team, but really for those deeper, and really just in general as well, to see discipline of a father who loves us and cares for us, and just to know that, and just apply it to the serious things, but just the less serious things too. That to know that, I mean, if your life is just great and nothing is but blessing, and you've not had any hard things, I'd be concerned, because you're not growing, and it's really kind of the unloving father who doesn't bother to discipline us and help us to experience failure kind of under his covering and protection. And so that's the point of the writer saying that those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines. That's what loving fathers do. And so he brings it to this whole analogy of this picture of parenting, which I think is fascinating, because he uses the example of human parenting. So he unfolds the analogy this way. He says this in verses 9 and 10. He says, "We have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live?" And catch this verse. "They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best." Isn't that interesting? That our earthly fathers, disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, inferring that there's probably some things they did that was not the best, but they thought it was best. It just goes to show that even 2,000 years ago in the ancient world, they understood parenting as a mixed bag. I mean, nobody gets exactly right. Even those of us who had great parents, they did some things right, they did some things wrong. We as parents, we make mistakes. When Caleb was learning how to walk, I would set him up and he'd plop down. I'd set him up and he'd plop down. And then finally I just set him up and I looked him straight in the eye. I said, "Caleb, if you take a step, I will love you more." And right there, he took his first step. Now, I was joking, but that was probably a mistake. He's probably going to be in counseling someday because of this subconscious thing I embedded in him. Megan, when she was in grade school or something, she asked about Mormonism. I can't remember why. I thought it'd be a good idea to show her the South Park episode that talked about Mormonism, forgetting about all the horrific language in South Park. And I remember Megan, "Why did you show this to me?" That was probably a mistake. Losing Hannah at IKEA at age 5, a mistake. So we all make mistakes, but God, he does not make any mistakes. He is the perfect father, and that's that next verse. God disciplines us for our good all the time. He is a truly good father. But to really kind of understand what it means for God to be a good father, I think we kind of need to look at examples of of bad fathers. And I don't want to say this to kind of beat up on dads. We all make mistakes. But just kind of look at this examples of kind of bad earthly fathers, things that we would consider, these are not good parenting tips. Abandonment. Some fathers have abandoned their families. Neglect. Some have kind of, they're physically present, but they're emotionally detached. There's neglect happening. For some, there's abuse. It's maybe like this lashing out in uncontrolled rage, and so there's the punishment comes not as loving discipline. It's just uncontrolled rage, and sometimes there's verbal or physical abuse, and sometimes almost just as worse is spoiling the child, overprotecting, so you're never allow them to fail and to grow from those things. Now, if you look at that list, I don't think, mentally you would say, I don't think of God in any of those terms. He wouldn't do that. But just ask yourself the question, in those times when you've gone through really difficult things, something's happened in your life, and it's been a tough thing, it's been a hard thing, what is your knee-jerk reaction? What do you default to? Have you ever thought, God has abandoned me in this moment? Have you ever thought, there's neglect here. He's got more important things to do. I'm not even on his radar right now. Have you ever thought that? Or do you feel like he's lashing out in anger? He's so angry at my sin, he's just punished me. He's lashing out in anger. Or do you kind of whimper and like why is this happening to me? God should be taking care of me and coddling me and kind of being overprotective. Now, I think I've thought all those things at different times, that kind of comes from the heart. We experience those things at some level. I've had kind of reactions in each of those categories. But God is not in any of those categories. And so we need to affirm that no, he never abandons us. He will never leave us. He would never, he's a good father. And no, he does not neglect us. He's always engaged with us. We're always on his radar. He's always thinking of us. And no, he does not lash out in uncontrolled rage over our sin. There's no abuse. He does lovingly discipline, but he doesn't lash out in anger and punish us. He disciplines us in love. And no, he does not coddle us either. There's tough love, but it is love. He really, truly loves us. And so he is all of those things. He is a good father. And that's actually what this text kind of goes on to say in the last phrase there that we're looking at. In order that we would share his holiness, he wants us to take on the Father's likeness. He wants us to grow to become like our Father, our Heavenly Father. And so he disciplines us for that end, because he wants us to become just like him, to grow into his likeness, that we may share in his holiness. And a great example of this is Joseph in the Bible. There's two characters in the Bible that most people kind of think of these two. Joseph, in the book of Genesis, and Daniel. These are the two guys who had perfect records. They never did anything wrong. The Bible doesn't ever, there's no failure that they had, no sin that they had. Well, I think you can make the case for Daniel, but Joseph, really? This guy was on course to become a spoiled, arrogant, prideful, self-absorbed young man. He was kind of too good for his own good, and so God allowed all this suffering to come into his life at the hands of his brothers, and he experienced incredible suffering, and it humbled him, and it broke him, and it was real suffering for years, decades, but at the end of all of that, he said to his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And what Joseph was meaning, that God orchestrated all this so that he would be present to save the ancient world from starvation, but it's also true that God meant it for Joseph's good, because otherwise he would not have been able to become the kind of man who could lead the ancient world through a great crisis as he did. And so God meant it for his good as well. Now you can only, I think, really though, in the midst of real suffering and trauma even, have that phrase, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, that God really meant this for good. God, there's really good that's going to come out of whatever this thing is. I think you can only really take comfort from that if you really do view God as your loving, good Father, that he doesn't have any of those abandonment, neglect, abuse things. He truly has your best interest in mind. He loves you. And if you also have the mindset that the things that he's doing in you, growing you through the suffering, it's going to carry over beyond the confines of this world. that you are a creature made for another world. And so the things that he is building in you now, even through the suffering, he's building you into creatures who will thrive in the world to come that he is preparing to usher each of us into one day. So, for our Life Together groups, every week I supply questions. And they're on the website. If you're in a Life Together group, you discuss them. If you're not, that's totally fine. You can actually use the questions too. It's just on our worship service page for every Sunday. You can find the questions there, discuss as a family. I'm going to give you them ahead of time, just so you can discuss in your groups, or you just kind of reflect. Maybe this is a reflection time for us right here as we close. And the first question is going to be this: what is one hard or painful thing from your past that you can now look back and see how God used it to strengthen you? And I immediately thought of a couple things. The death of my mom when I was 10. Don't have all the answers with that, but I can see how God brought good out of it. I think of an experience of being rejected from something I really wanted 20 years ago, and I was kind of devastated. But now I look back and I think, oh, thank God that he didn't allow that to happen. I can see how it would not have been a good thing at all. And so what might it be for you? What hard or painful thing from your past that enough distance has passed that now you couldn't see at the time, but now you can look back and see some good that God brought out of it. And then the second question is, what is one hard thing in your life right now that you would like to accept as something God is using to grow you, or that you need to see it in that way eventually, even if right now, honestly, it's just too hard to do so in your own strength. And, the pain is too raw, and that's totally understandable and right. I mean, we're not often going to see the good that's going to, when we're in the moment, it's okay to not try to find the good in it. But in those moments, what we really need is strength to see us through. We need the Lord's strength to carry us through those moments. And I think of David. David had an instance when he was living in the town of Ziklag, and he and his men were away, and his town was invaded, and they captured all their wives and children and left. And so they come to the city, and their wives and kids are gone. They're presumed either dead or worse. And David is devastated because his wife and kids are gone, and his men are so traumatized and upset, they want to kill David. And in that moment, before there's any hint that there's going to be a happy ending to that story, which there was a happy ending to that story, there's almost a throwaway verse, but it's such a powerful verse. The verse says this: "But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God." Isn't that powerful? He strengthened himself in the Lord his God. So what might be some things that you just simply need the strengthening of the Lord in whatever situation it might be for you right now? And then the final third question is, when in the midst of difficulties, what do you see as God's role? And hopefully you know the answer to that question, right, based on the sermon. He's a good father, he's disciplined. But how do you really see his role? I mean, what's your default knee-jerk reaction when hard things come into your life? Do you immediately go to, God must be punishing me? Or do you immediately go to, God's ignoring me, he's got better things to do, I'm not that important? I mean, it's in those times of real trauma or struggle or just hard things in our life that it kind of bubbles to the surface some wrong views of God that maybe we didn't think we had, but we really do, because that's how we react to it. And so where at the heart level, if not the mind level, do you need to see some correctives with regard to how you view God? So let's just kind of close in a word of prayer, and then I'm just going to kind of lead us through those three things and just take a moment to do that. So let's bow our heads and close our eyes right now. And Lord Jesus, we just take a moment and we want to thank you first for those things in the past that were really hard at the time. We didn't understand what was happening, but now we can see that you brought good at it. So we thank you for that. But honestly, there may be some things in our past that we still can't see what possible good could have come of that. We want to thank you for that too, because we trust in a good Father who, even if we cannot see all the answers, and there are certainly things we won't see the answers, we trust in your goodness even in those matters. And so we thank you. And then, Lord, whatever struggles we may be going through right now, and some of us may be really, really difficult things, and for some of us it might just be a lighter affliction or a lighter issue. But in all of those, we just give those to you right now. We ask that you would strengthen us. We thank you for your grace is sufficient. Your power is made perfect in weakness. And so we just confess, God, this is bigger than me. I can't handle this, but I just run to you as my Father. And would you give me the strength that I need to go through this? And then finally, would you give us a right understanding and view of who you are as a Father? And would you free us and heal us of maybe where we have a wrong view of what you're really like? And so as we do that, we just, as John read in the opening verses, we fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. We fix our eyes on Jesus. We want to know what God is like? Look at Jesus. He is the exact representation of God Almighty. And so we fix our eyes on you, Jesus. Show us what the Father's really like. In Jesus' name, amen.